Hi, this is Frank Beddor, and you're listening to the FSF PopCast.
Like Alice in Wonderland, we too had a choice. One pill would make us smarter, the other pill would make us funny. Apparently, we chose a shiny option number 3, which means we did neither.
Our show is brought to you by our charity sponsor, the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund, which supports the Wish Upon a Teen Foundation that helps out sick kids when they need it most.
And just imagine the comfort you'll give Red Shirt crewman number 1998. He'll know that when he puts on the red shirt and joins the crew of the Enterprise in their struggle against Tucker, Pat, Woogie, and Brett Favre, that he didn't leave his family destitute and without hope, because the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund has his back and what's left of Warren's baseball. All right, guys, our guest today is a best-selling author. He's got this great book series, which I am very excited to get started into. It's called the Looking Glass series. That was very reflective, and you probably couldn't see that. But anyway, this is that, and you guys are going to want to check that out. It's a modern-style revision of the Lewis Caroll classic, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Good luck editing that out, John. John's our editor, by the way, if you didn't know that. Now, not to mention that he's a world champion skier. He's been an actor, a stuntman. He's also been a producer of a couple films. Maybe you've heard of one of them. You know, there's this one wasn't very popular. Not very many people liked it. It was called There's Something About Mary. Yeah, maybe you saw that one. I totally didn't. Anyway, we are very excited to welcome Frank Beddor to the FSF PopCast. Welcome to the show, Frank.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, very excited to have you on today. This is one of those times when we have somebody on where I don't know where to start first with any line of questioning, because typically when we talk to somebody, they're like, oh, I was an actor and a singer, or oh, I was a writer and an actor. You're like, screw it, I'm going to do everything, and I'm going to be good at it all, which is highly depressing for us normal folk. Now, normally I like to start by asking our guests about their origin story, you know, how they got to be the person who they are, that's sitting across the interview table from us. But today I want to talk to you about your career progression and really your transformation over the years. Because like I said, there's a lot of different things that you've done, a lot of different hats that you've worn over the years. So how does one go from being a world champion skier to doing stunts and acting to being a movie producer to becoming a best-selling author? How does that transition work? Because they all seem so wildly different.
Well, that's actually a really good question, because I've tried to connect the dots on how that and why that happened in interviews, and even when I'm talking to my kids sometimes. And I usually have to go back to my dad, who was oddly an advocate of failing. He goes, you know, I failed a lot in my life. And then he points out that President Lincoln failed in all of these elections before he was elected president. And he said the thing about failing is it opens doors to other opportunities and maybe something that you'll enjoy in your life, because ultimately, if your work is the same as the thing in life that gives you joy, you've really succeeded. And so I had a passion when I was young for athletics and for skiing. I grew up in Minnesota. It was cold, it was isolated. And I also wasn't that popular in school, and skiing was something that I gravitated towards, like a lot of, you know, teenagers, that I was good at. And it started to give me an identity. And I really focused on that out of insecurity, which is the part what drives people to become really successful. And underneath it, there's some level of insecurity. And so skiing and having some success in skiing became the catalyst for me to feel confident enough after my ski career to take choices and to fail. What you don't point out and what you couldn't know is that my stunt career was very short and not that successful. My acting career was definitely not successful. And there was a lot of years of struggle and uncertainty. But because I had had success in skiing, I was able to hold on to that part of me that felt secure and hang on to that as I was trying new things and failing. And while I was skiing, I was a reader and a writer, but I had this laser focus on the thing I was doing.
Sure.
And then when I started acting, they talked about playwrights and learning and studying playwrights to understand the text so you could act. And I had a really great teacher, and that's when I fell in with writing. And then I went from there.
Interesting. Also interesting to me is the way that you phrased it about your dad being an advocate of failing. Now, last night, my son and I and one of his friends went to we live in Michigan. So we went to the Detroit Tigers baseball game in downtown Detroit. And on the way home, his friend and I were talking because my son was sitting in the back seat, finishing up a paper he had to write for college. So his buddy and I were sitting in the front seat as we're driving, and he starts talking about, the importance of failing. So it's kind of interesting, last night and now this afternoon. I don't know what the universe is trying to tell me here, but I'm actually starting to get a little worried right now. But I think it's interesting, because the way that your dad phrased it, but also the way that his my son's friend phrased it was that, yeah, people think failing is a bad thing, but it's so vital and important because you now know what not to do the next time. You know how to better attack something else, and you know where your pitfalls are.
Yeah, and when you're a teen or you're in your 20s, that's the time to do it, right? Sports is a metaphor for that, which is why when you go to a baseball game and you come out of a game like that, you might talk about that, win or lose. But my dad also used to say your 20s should be the time you explore, and by the time in your 30s, you can decide if you want to focus on one thing or not. But
Mm-hmm.
which is not an easy thing to do. You're taught, hey, get that college education, get that good job that pays, and then
Right.
stay in there, stick with it. Not, hey, go try a bunch of stuff and fail and call me if you need some money.
Let me know if you
Yeah.
bomb.
Yeah, there's a lot of parents out there that would not give that opportunity. So you're
Yeah.
very lucky in that regard, which is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, listen, my mom was on the other side of it. My mom was very nervous about that and where's the security and all those issues. And she continued to, be that way for basically until she passed away a few years ago. So it depends on personalities, but I'm very much my father's son. So my father was very adventuresome. He had a traveling water ski show that had a one-legged boy that he met who had lost his leg crawling under a friend of his crawling under a train. And my dad went to the hospital and said, hey, I'm looking for a one-legged kid for my show. Do you think you'd be up? I'll teach you how to water ski. Taught this kid how to water ski. He's had this quartet of singers that, all the guys from the football team and they would carry the cheerleaders on their shoulders. And he traveled all over the Midwest. And then he decided to promote it. He was going to water ski down the Mississippi for Paul Bunyan Land was his sponsor. And the boat was the Blue Ox, Babe the Blue Ox. And my dad was Paul Bunyan. And he water skied from Minneapolis to New Orleans, promoting his water ski show and stopping in city after city and putting on a show in each city. So I was like,
That's
okay,
really cool.
how do I compete with that guy?
You don't, unfortunately, but
Yeah, you don't.
But somehow you still did. So impressive.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was not what I was expecting.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, speaking of your skiing career, I would not say I'm the best skier. In fact, the last time I went skiing, I was very, very small. And I have a very distinct memory of flipping head over heels a few times and crashing into a pile of snow. So over your career as a skier or a stunt person, what was the funniest and or worst wipeout you've ever experienced?
Well, I've had a lot of those, but let's see. The worst wipeout, the scariest, was in Lac des Tines, France, and oh no, I'm sorry, that's not true. The worst was in Quebec, and I had met a very attractive Quebec local skier, and she and I had spent. I stayed out really late that night, and so I was really tired the next day, and a whiteout came in. And so I was doing aerial acrobatics, and when you do aerial acrobatics, the snow in the sky helps you distinguish where you're at. And when there's a whiteout, when there's a lot of, what they do is they put pine needles on the landing hill so that you can orient yourself to flipping and where to land. But I was, and the in run was funky and the speed was wrong, and I had been out late. I misjudged everything. And instead of doing 3 flips, I did 2.5 flips. And, you're landing on about a 30-degree landing hill, but my tips stuck in and my back arched. And for what seemed about 30 seconds, which was probably about 5 seconds, my left side was paralyzed. And I thought I had paralyzed myself. And I thought that was it. So that was truly terrifying in the moment. Both skis were broken in half. And as I got up and I was staggering up, my face was all, burned from the snow. I handed my broken skis to my friend and said, well, these are your souvenirs. I'm not sure it was worth it, but
that's interesting. I'm happy you didn't get paralyzed.
The funniest thing that happened to me was I was in Australia for the summer tour of their winter, and my friend, we were going up the chairlift. It was raining at the top, and he said, I'm jumping off. And I go, what? He goes, I'm not getting wet, I'm jumping off. And he swung around and let go. And I go, well, I'm going with you. And I went, but when he let go, the chairlift bounced, and I bounced off the chairlift and fell on my back in the snow. Now, it wasn't that high. It was only, I don't know, 12 feet or something, but I got the wind knocked out of me. And then a mountain manager saw this and came down and started screaming at me and was hitting me with his pole. Like, what do you think you're doing? Like, you risked all these people on the chairlift. And then I got kicked off the mountain, and I was there for a competition, and I couldn't use the chairlift. So the organizers said, you can take this snowcat to the top. And the day of the competition, it was also raining. I was the only competitor in the snowcat at the top of the mountain, dry, waiting for my run.
So that's fantastic.
Yeah, so. Hey, I guess it all worked out in the end.
Yeah. Anyway, those are my 2 stories.
Frank's like, and ta-da, I'm done.
More adventurous life than most.
Not
gonna lie, did not know there was skiing in Australia.
Yeah, Mount Thredbo and Mount Buller. It's quite good. New Zealand's better, but we had a great time. I don't know with climate change what's going on down there, but yep, they definitely have skiing.
And all I can think about is hobbits on skis in New Zealand. So there's that. Okay.
And now, a word from our show sponsor, Level Up Sabers. Their link can be found in the show notes.
All right, so Frank, every time we have an author on the show, I talk to my daughter because my daughter is a voracious reader, and she's so very excited because we literally built her new bookshelves in her bedroom yesterday, and she got to put all her books up on the wall in her new bookshelves. She's got 5 bookshelves that span the whole one side of her room, and her whole wall is nothing but books. And
amazing.
She's in book heaven at the moment. So I always ask her, hey, do you know anything written by this person? And when I said your name, the name didn't ring a bell. But I said, oh, well, he wrote the Looking Glass series. She goes, oh, wait a second. You mean Looking Glass Wars? I said, yeah, the Looking Glass Wars. That's what it is. And that's when she brought me out this book. She's like, I literally just bought this.
Oh, wow.
Literally bought this. The spine is barely even cracked on it. But most of that is done by me because I was looking at it. And I just want to say before I have a question for you here. I promise we're getting to one, but I just want to point out that I'm very excited actually to get into this book because we found it late last night, and that's
How old's your daughter?
She's 16.
Oh, okay, perfect.
But the artwork in this, sir, is fantastic. The depiction of the Jabberwocky and Red, and the Mad Hatter and the card soldiers. As I was looking at this, I was like, yeah, this looks awesome. This looks amazing. And I could get where people were coming from because I've read so many reviews about your book, the series in general. But so yeah, very excited to get into this and to look into this. I'll be breaking that spine in on that book here very shortly. All right, so I told you all that so I could get to this point. Hopefully you're still awake. Now, can you tell us where your vision for the revision of Lewis Carroll's story, where did that come from? How did that come about? And did you encounter any specific challenges as a writer when you crafting a story inside of another story?
Well, those are very good questions. And I'm just going to go back because you had the book open and you were showing artwork. And that artwork was, as a movie producer, I had the experience and understanding that the visuals became a really great tool to help readers, make a decision of whether they want this book or not. It also became a great tool in marketing in terms of going from website to website to share something, whether it was exclusive or not. But mostly it was a way to express the world visually and have that be an invitation. And so the fact that you just opened the book and looked at the artwork as an invitation to getting into it is really satisfying. And I'm going to give you a question to ask me later about that artwork because it became there's a Star Wars story, and apparently you guys like Star Wars. There's a Star Wars story attached to it, and it's interesting from a writing standpoint. So
okay,
I'm going to
come back to that.
Come back to that. But so as I mentioned, or you guys mentioned at the top, I produced There's Something About Mary, and I was in London for the world premiere, and I had an hour to kill. So I went to the British Museum, and I don't know if you've been to the British Museum, but it's really remarkable. Yeah, it's a remarkable place, great place to take your kids. And they had an exhibit of ancient cards, like playing cards. Matter of fact, they had cards that Napoleon had commissioned of his many battles, and there were these hand-painted images. But what caught my attention at the very end of the exhibit was an incomplete deck of cards. And on these cards were images that reminded me of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, except they seemed a little bit more goth and dark and kind of twisted. And I was like, what's the deal with these cards? And I was kind of obsessed about these cards, and I was telling all my friends about them. And I guess it was not so exciting to everybody else because I was out with my friend Richard. We were at this bar and this girl came up and I was talking about these cards and he was kicking me under the table. And I'm like, what? He goes, stop talking about the cards, man. It's boring. And I said, well, look at it. I'm obsessed with these cards. And he goes, I know. I'm going to help you out. I know this antiquities dealer, and I think he trades and collects cards. So call him up and you can talk to him. So he gave me his number and I called this guy up, and turns out that he knew all about the cards at the British Museum, and he claimed to have the remaining cards to the incomplete deck. So I basically invited myself over, and he was very eccentric. And he left the room. I was asking a bunch of questions. He left the room and he came back with this box and he opened it up, and these cards from this incomplete deck were there. And he started to tell me this story. And that story became the inspiration for the true story of what really happened to that little girl, Alice Little, quote unquote, the muse of Lewis Caroll. And that kicked off my 20-year writing adventure.
That is a really cool story, actually. I
So, story with a story with a story with a story.
The story
Full
yeah,
stack.
behind the story behind the story. Turns out that Lewis Carroll wasn't inspired to write his fairy tale to entertain Alice Little. Alice Little, her true name is Princess Alice Hart. She was exiled to our world, adopted by the Little family. She told her harrowing story, but it was too scary and too disturbing. And she had been a street urchin, and he thought it was trauma. So he rewrote her story so that it would be more acceptable and plausible and delightful and whimsical. And the Looking Glass Wars is what really happened to Alice.
that's a really cool concept. Now, when and I love actually I love it. I think it's fantastic. I love it when stories there's a re-envisioning of the story, and it's not just, because sometimes when people say they've re-envisioned something, it's like story adjacent. It's just kind of like, here's the original story and here's their story. There's very little changes between the two. And from everything I've seen so far, and just kind of perusing the book and looking at the reviews and looking at the books that follow this in your series, it is certainly not. I think the only thing that I've seen that's what I would call story adjacent is that there's some similar names and locations, and it's a much different story, and I think that's very cool.
Well, everything is a little bit of a twist. So if you think about the bigger concept, so if Alice Little, the muse for Lewis Carroll, is actually Alice Hart, that means Wonderland is real. And then if Wonderland is only one of many nations in Wonder Nations, then it's infinite the amount of creativity you can have. So with the characters that like the White Rabbit, which in the true story is Bibwood Hart, which is an anagram of White Rabbit that Lewis Carroll changed. And Hatter Madigan is not the Mad Hatter. He's really this badass guy. Queen Red, they're all like just a slight riff, and then the worlds themselves become like the chessboard desert is a real place with real combat issues, and it looks like a chessboard, a checkerboard or a chessboard, because the board, which is a military outfit, does their training there. So it starts to be an exercise in world creation and imagination. And then it expands above and beyond. You can't write 15 books and stay in the box of what Lewis Carroll did.
Right.
You have to broaden the canvas, which is why the concept allows that.
Yeah, because if you didn't have a vision for where it was going to go past that, you never would have made it past, one book, two books, So it's very cool that you have a vision about that. So the second part of that question was, did you find any specific challenges in trying to craft a story inside of that story? Or was there something where you hit a point where it's like, that was the difficult spot for you to get around? I mean, and I'm not talking like just writer's block or something like that. I'm talking about, where there was a difficulty to connect your world to that world, whether visually or in character or story build.
Well, it was my first published novel, so there was lots of problems. Not that there were issues with taking the Lewis Carroll mythos and creating new mythos necessarily, except when it comes to when you're creating a whole world, fantasy, what the logic and rules of your universe need to make sense. And what I kept doing was trying to figure out, okay, like let's just take transportation. So is it through a looking glass? Is it a portal? What is it? And I wanted to use the Pool of Tears because I thought that was different and unusual. So I was like, okay, you get there through the Pool of Tears, you drop into the Pool of Tears, and people know as a legend, it takes you to another world, but no one ever comes back. But eventually Hatter has to come back. And then in our world, he's going from puddle to puddle, looking for a puddle where no puddle should be, which is a portal. And I kept screwing that up. I just kept backing myself into corners. And like, that doesn't make sense. Now I've broken a rule. Then I had a character go through a mirror. I'm like, this is just cheating on all levels. So I have to figure it. I have to take one one mechanism and be able to drill down on it so that readers can suspend disbelief, then it makes sense to me. And I have my own logic. And so I had to rewrite things so many times, particularly chapters that had to do with, because in the novel, you go from Wonderland to our world back and forth. So it's really a story of Alice not falling down a rabbit hole, coming up through the rabbit hole to our world, and then returning to fight for her rightful place as the true warrior queen. So suddenly there was people going back and forth, and I had to make sense of that and not break rules. And I was breaking a lot of rules, and I think I still break rules. People are like, that doesn't make sense, that thing. Well, that was because it was the first book I wrote and I didn't know what I was doing. And so if I was to go back, I would do a much better job. And I can tell you the scene that haunts me that I wish I could go back.
Okay.
Can I describe it?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm going to give you the premise of the book because, I do Comic-Con, so it's going to take 30 seconds. So Princess Alice Hart, she's the star of the show. She's enjoying her 7th birthday when suddenly there's a violent coup led by her evil Aunt Red. Her bodyguard, Hatter Madigan, whisks her away through the pool of tears. Now, the legend is, as I said, it's a portal from Wonderland to our world, but no one's ever come back. They have no choice. They jump in to the pool of tears. Tragically, they're separated. Alice shoots out of a puddle. She ends up in Oxford. Lewis Caroll shoots out of a puddle and he ends up in Paris. And he goes on a 13-year mission to find Alice. That's the story. That's the setup. So in the novel, he's one mission. He swore to the queen he would find her daughter and return her to Wonderland to be the rightful queen. And for 13 years, he's searching for her. And when he finally finds her, she's at Buckingham Palace because she's going to marry Queen Victoria's fourth son, Leopold. He gets outside of the palace and he gets in a fight and he gets wounded, and he decides to go back to Wonderland and tell everybody that she's alive and that send reinforcements to find her and bring her home. Okay. Like 13 years, you get shot in the shoulder, you go back to Wonderland, you don't have a confrontation with her, you don't see her face to face. The reason I didn't want it to be face to face, because I thought, I can't have her go back to Wonderland. And I thought, oh, he's definitely going to bring Alice with him back to Wonderland, no matter what. Mm-hmm. Versus having the confrontation, having him go through 13 years, having her say, I'm not going back with you. My life is here. And him saying, no, it's my sworn duty. You have to come back with me. And then her trump card is, wait, I'm your queen, right? You have to do what I say, right? Yes. I command you to leave. Leave this minute. So what could have been a better scene, having our two leads face to face and having a huge conflict? Where is that scene in the book? It's not there. Do I want to swear? I do. So that's my trouble.
All right. I think that's a very specific challenge. Yeah, absolutely.
So the only way I can fix that is do a TV show or a movie, and that's how I came to rewrite the scene, and then I had to forgive myself and move on and say that book was in that time and that's done. I did the best I could, and there's probably a million things I would change now, but that scene in particular is haunts me.
The joy of hindsight being 2020.
Exactly.
It's always great when you're writing a novel and anything, and then suddenly you write it knowing you have one way to go, but then you end up going the total opposite direction anyway.
Yeah. Too late. I wish you would have been around earlier. You could have told me that.
Well, along with writing the Looking Glass Wars, you also have the All Things Alice podcast that you started.
Yeah.
How did that come about, and what have been some highlights or important things that have happened during your show?
Oh, well, thanks for mentioning that. I don't know about you guys, but because I live in the Wonderland universe, and I didn't know this when I started. I didn't realize how deeply seated Alice in Wonderland was in pop culture. And during the sort of the last 4 or 5 years, in just in politics alone, we're down a rabbit hole, we're through a looking glass. It was almost weekly that you could see a headline about that. And then I didn't know, for instance, that Guinness for 30 years did all of these Alice in Wonderland ads about their Guinness beer being good for you, riffing off of Alice in Wonderland. And then if you just think about Lewis Caroll didn't invent rabbit holes, but he invented it as a portal. How we use it, it's in our everyday life every single day.
Right.
Somebody says it. So turns out Alice in Wonderland is the most quoted literary works in the world behind the Bible. So I thought, well, if Alice is so deeply seated, I could do endless podcasts about Alice as a muse for creativity, for imagination, for language, for gardens, for video games, for books. And so I thought I would have guests on and use Alice as the muse for your creativity and your, whatever endeavor that you're inspired to, and then see what people's takes are on Alice. And so I think to answer the second part of the question, the fun that I've had or interesting is having multiple guests on. There's one musical that's coming out called the Mad Hatter Musical, and I had the composer and the lyricist and the book writer. That was great. They were all talking about their influences, and they had such a deep understanding of it. But people have a deep understanding of Alice from pop culture, not just those books. You have to add. You have to Jefferson Airplane. You have to add The Matrix, like you brought up in the beginning about Blue Pill and a Red Pill. But it was blue and red liquid from the original. So we're using it all of the time. So it's curious to me what we're actually scraping together when we're inventing and talking about these things. You're taking 150 years of pop culture, especially since the 50s and 60s through current day. So that's been fascinating. And then it's also fun to ask. I'll ask you guys, if you were a character from Alice in Wonderland, who would you be and why?
No. Oh, no.
Yeah, and both the Lewis Caroll adaptation and what I've seen out of your book, both I want to be the Mad Hatter or,
Hatter Madigan.
Hatter Madigan, yes.
Everyone wants to be the Mad Hatter.
Because he's fun in the Disney movie. Okay. He's a little crazy, he's eccentric, he's, whatever. In Batman, the Mad Hatter is also involved there. Yeah. And
he's a villain. He's a great villain.
He's a great villain, exactly. And then in your book series, as you put it earlier, he's kind of BA. And I kind of like that idea of him being like this, bodyguard, tough guy who can, just in what I've seen of him and what I've read about him, and because there's like a wiki page out there about your books and and all these different things and how they describe him as he's basically I see him as like one of the guys from Assassin's Creed, but as in old English style dress, and it's just really cool.
Well, and you're wearing a hat today, and he is a man of many hats, and his hat is his signature weapon. When he throws his hat, it transforms into blades. GRG.
Yeah, Grand Rapids Griffins.
So I need to get you a Hatter hat. So for Halloween. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, please.
Oh, geez. I think I would like to be like the Cheshire Cat, just this unknowable being that just seems to be there for good or bad purposes, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And just mess with people.
Yeah. With
just
that
to
smile.
be like, go this way or that way or this way or that way. Kind of like a more sinister Bugs Bunny a little bit.
So that's what I do. I ask people their favorite Alice inspired piece of pop culture, whether it's a song or an amusement park or a movie or TV show or what have you. So
I think it's interesting that in all honesty, it not until this conversation right here today did I ever associate the Matrix with Alice in Wonderland. Ever.
Mhm.
deeply, deeply,
Oh, yeah.
deeply influenced. Everything
Never-
in that. Everything
never
in that
even-
is.
It just like honestly, like 747 right over top of the head. Never even considered it, never even thought about it.
Morpheus literally says that in the movie.
Yeah.
He says, "See how far this rabbit hole goes."
Yeah.
Yeah, I know he
Or how
says
deep
that,
the
but
rabbit hole goes, or something like that. It's literally in the movie.
And
I
not only
understand that he
that,
said it, but still.
yeah. No, and not only that, if you look at the floors, they're all checkerboards.
Mhm.
It's there's so many motifs in that.
That's just crazy to me.
in that show.
And I got to
So-
go back and rewatch it just because now. Just
And there's a
I mean, yeah.
rabbit tattoo.
Follow the White Rabbit.
Yep,
Yeah.
follow the White Rabbit. So
and as soon as you said the red pill, blue pill, it was, and I'm like, that's what really that's what turned the light bulb on in my head when you said that. I was like, oh.
yeah, and they did that big campaign
be-
with the poster for the latest one was take the red pill or the blue pill. That's it.
Yeah, it's just
So-
crazy, man. So
I mean, same thing with you, Tim. It didn't occur to me how deeply ingrained Alice in Wonderland is in our pop culture. I mean, just thinking of how many movies of Alice in Wonderland there are. Like, I can think of at least 4 off the top of my head, and each one stacking understanding on top of each other. It's like, are we talking about the Tim Burton version? Are we talking about the Disney version? Are we talking about the hundreds of plays of Alice in Wonderland? Just all of it taking either direct from the book or from the book and from current pop culture. Maybe they're going the more whimsical, maybe they're going the more like gothic grimdark style. It's amazing how far the rabbit hole goes,
Yeah, I mean, what you see mostly is Alice inspired motif. So in Stranger Things, you'll see an image of the rabbit hole. I mean, of a rabbit from Lewis Carroll's on the wall in a kid's room, or the Tubi ad with the rabbit hole that come into our network. In Jurassic Park, there was on the computer, there was a white rabbit. There was some rabbit thing that I can't remember. Star Trek, they literally had the book. I mean, it's constantly referenced because, like I said, she's been a muse for many, many creators, and incredible number of musicians. By the way, I have a soon-to-be 16-year-old daughter, and she's, of course, obsessed with Taylor Swift. And of course, she doesn't think I know anything about Taylor Swift, which I don't know much. However, she told me that Taylor Swift wrote a Wonderland song about this mystery man that was told about a breakup that was Harry Styles. So I wrote a blog about it and how amazing Taylor Swift's lyrics were and how expressive they were. And suddenly my daughter's like, she's sharing my blog with all her friends. She has not mentioned my book to any of her friends. I can't tell you. I don't remember. I don't know if she ever has, but this Taylor Swift blog is hot.
Mm-hmm.
well, see, you just got to work Taylor Swift into your books. That's all you got to do. You'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm going to cast her as Alice.
There you go. Actually, that might not be a bad pull.
I'm pretty sure people would see that.
Yeah.
Like, not just because Taylor Swift, but because I
mean,
would
back up the
probably
Brink-
watch that
yeah.
show or movie.
Back up the Brink trucks to get her, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So, Frank, one of the things that I was looking at when we do our research for people is I like to scour through their website if they have one, as one tends to do when you do a polite digital stalking, or what the kids are calling research these days. But one of the things that I found, and not just on your own website, but going out about into other various corners of the interwebs, is that since about 2011, there has been a groundswell of people who want to see your book series transformed into either a movie, a series of movies, or something long format television wise. Now, so here I have a two-part question for you, because you kind of mentioned this earlier, especially with the rework of your scene and how you would like to have that reworked. So if that were to happen, do you have any reservations about the process, knowing that it's not uncommon for things to have to change from the page to the screen? I'll ask that one first.
No, I don't, because I have a lot of experience understanding that each medium is different. So even when I went from my prose to my graphic novel series, it was a whole different animal that I had to understand. And from the movie standpoint, in the book, you meet my character at 7, then at 13, and then 20. And when you do a movie, you always want the star to be introduced early on. So the trick and I'll tell you about this later, when I was first in the middle of trying to develop this as a motion picture, was how do I condense this story that takes place over 13 years, and you have a young girl who turns into a 20-year-old, and go back and forth within 2 or 2.5 hours. And that was really challenging. And I was nervous about doing that and not having control, but I wasn't nervous about the actual taking the book apart and putting it back together in the best way possible for a movie. It just seemed very challenging. Then when I pivoted to do it as a TV show, then all sorts of opportunities presented themselves. There are, of course, these sort of rules that people, go with. For instance, okay, we need to see the star of our show. We don't want people to fall in love with a 7-year-old and then have her disappear. But in Queen's Gambit, they did a really great job. They had a cold open of the lead character, and then they cut to her as a little girl, and the entire first episode was her origin story. And then at the very end of that scene, you picked up and you saw her entering the competition, and then they back up again to when you can see her, the same actress, even though she's 15, 16. And that was a bit of an epiphany for me in terms of thinking about how I could construct a 8 to 10 episode television show, and what the benefit of adapting the Looking Glass Wars as a television show versus a movie.
Yeah, because I would think that as a TV show, especially a long format TV show, something like you said about the 8 to 10 episode range per season, because you have multiple books here, that would probably be a better fit for you. Now, the second part of this question is just a hip shot here, because I look at what you're doing, and I look at some of the stuff that's already out there on other channels, and I'm like, man, where would I, as a viewer, want to see this type of content? And so I immediately thought of like Apple TV Plus or possibly Amazon, because those two seem to be the ones that have similar content and seem to be able to promote it well and understand what there is required to make that happen. So what are the chances of seeing a Looking Glass series?
Well, Amazon has a lot of those big fantasy shows, and so they are looking for IP that are in this universe as the Looking Glass Wars. And Apple is doing the same thing, right? They don't do a lot, but they want things that are what they call 4-quadrant, where like your show, where anybody can come on and listen to the show, whether you're a kid or male, female. So those are two really strong places for the Looking Glass Wars to live. Amazon, unfortunately, I went to them right after they bought Lord of the Rings for $250 million and Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
And so they really liked it. And they were like, you should come back to us. But what they were really saying to me was, bring us a package, bring us a showrunner, a director, an actor that we can't say no to. And as a producer, that's called packaging, and you have to find these people and put them together. It used to be that they would buy your idea. Like I have a movie at Warner Brothers. They bought the idea and then they develop it and then they go hire people. They go, hey, let's go get this person or that person.
Right.
But now it's more on the producer's shoulders to say, bring us everything because we're getting so much content. We want pre-packaged material that we can just say yes to and put it into the pipeline, not develop. And so I'm a little bit in between right now. I've done a beautiful deck. I've done a beautiful Bible. I wrote a pilot that I've now changed because of some of the story, like The Witcher. I love the way The Witcher is structured, and that's a big universe, and it's playing with time. And then the time and the characters are a bit of a mystery until they get revealed. Oh, that young person is this person. And for the Looking Glass Wars, that's really effective. So, kind of like with my novel, which took 5 years, I'm learning on the job. So I'm a little slow. I get the producing part of it, but I'm really trying to craft the script for the pilot or the backup. So that I've been spending the lion's share of my time doing that. And I do get a lot of people who are very supportive and really want to see this in another medium.
All right, very good.
Yeah, so thanks for reminding me that I'm letting people down. I appreciate that.
I mean, you talked about it earlier in the interview.
Failing.
Always failing up.
I'm failing right now. I'm not failing up, but I'm definitely failing.
I just want you to know, Frank, I do what I can to help out you. So you're welcome.
Yeah, you're a great coach. My dad would love you.
All right.
Now, I did have another question, but you mentioned the art and that you have stories about that. So, can you talk about that? Because I'm more curious about
Star Wars
the art in the book.
Yeah. So I have this character. It's a card soldier, and I have a description of I was playing around. My book was not even finished. I was in the middle of it, and I was like, okay, what is a card soldier? How could that card fold completely? And so the deck could be stacked out in a field somewhere and you wouldn't know it. And then those cards could, somehow animate into something. Like, that's what I need. I need something cool like that. What would that look like? And I couldn't figure it out. And I had seen the artwork on Star Wars, and I said, I'm going to write email to Doug Chang, who was the artist on so much of the Star Wars. And I said, hey, I'm this writer and I'm a producer. And Mary had come out only a few years later. So I was like, oh, I'm the producer of something about Mary. I'm going to produce this movie, The Looking Glass Wars. I need some concept art. So he said, okay, I can, I'm busy. I'm working on a Zemeckis movie, but I can do something on the weekend. And I said, okay, this is what I need. So the thing I had written, I sent it to him. And so the art that you see in the book where the card soldiers are unfolding, he did that artwork, and I put it on my wall when I went to rewrite all those scenes. And that was my Doug Chang crutch or collaboration. I was like, okay, Doug, I am going to write about that. And so that's why the card soldiers look a little bit like, if you see the cover, what do they look like? Mm-hmm. They look like droids.
They look like a B-1 battle droid.
Yeah, they look like droids, exactly.
I saw that looking on your page and everything. I'm like, why does that look shockingly similar to a battle droid? But now I guess this is why.
Yeah. And, I was a little bit mixed about it because I thought, oh, it looks a lot like Star Wars. And I go, can that be a bad thing if you're a first-time writer and you have a book called The Looking Glass Wars? And then when I went to London at this big bookstore, I went and my publisher said, we have the window display for you. We got the whole, that's it.
There they are.
Doug,
that is fantastic, by the way.
Yeah.
That's great work.
So I go to this store for this talk, and they're really proud. My publishers are really proud that they got a whole window display. I show up alongside, on the other side was Star Wars. So I have this
Oh.
picture, Star Wars, Frank Beddor, Looking Glass Wars. So I said, okay, Doug, you did your job. I'm fine.
That's fantastic.
But over the years, when I do school events, kids ask me that. And I tell them that the guy who did Star Wars worked on it, and they think that's very cool.
Well, just so you know, I think that's very cool.
Thank you very much.
That is really, really cool.
So I did an animated trailer way back when, before anybody did book trailers, and it was animated with the card soldiers flying off the deck, landing and unfolding. It was the coolest trailer a book has ever had way back then, and I use it in school events. And then I say, hey, if I ever did a movie, would you guys go see this movie? And it's bedlam. They just erupt. And then one thing I also do is I tell them, I could make this movie next week. The problem is I don't have an actor to play the 10-year-old Alice and the 12-year-old Dodge. Do you guys know anybody that wants to star in a big movie? And then when they all throw up their hands, because they all get super crazy, like, then I call people out and I have them read a scene. And in the scene, the boy and the girl, they like each other, and they get all, and then the kids lose it because I make them hold hands and they lose it. Boys throw the script down and they won't do it.
Well, yeah, because you
can't do that in front of your classmates.
No,
it's very
liking girls. Ugh.
I'll catch cooties. So yeah, no, that's very cool. And just boy, my brains are going, because I just think this is such a cool concept, and I love the artwork in this. And now that I know that there's a Star Wars, it's a slight Star Wars tie-in, but that makes it even better for me, because I may have a slight Star Wars addiction. So
just a small one.
Yeah.
Out of the 198 Funko Pops that are behind me, probably about 160 of them are Star Wars. So
yeah, no, you're not quite there yet. Not quite.
Yeah. You know,
when it's 100%, then we'll know there's trouble. We'll
exactly.
An intervention.
Real quick, this animated trailer, where can we, like, is it on YouTube or something? Because I'd love to see that.
Yeah, check it out. It's on YouTube, and it's on the homepage of my website, frankbeddor.com, and under the videos. You can't miss it. The book unfolds, which you see the pages unfolding, and then I got this really great voice actor, and then you see the cards just fly, land. It's only 30 seconds, but it's...
We'll add it in right after this little portion. So, John, we can add that in right now. There's a good marker for it. All right, well, cool. We'll fix it in post. Anyway,
get to work, editor.
You're
no longer John, you're just editor.
That's right, editor boy. I've called him worse. He'll get over it. Yeah. All right, so Frank, we have one final question for you, and so we used to bore our guests not just with our conversation, but also with a quiz at the end. So now we just try to just bore them during the conversation, and we ended up with a silly question instead. And we settled on this one because we think that this is a question that not many people get asked anymore as an adult, and we think it's a shame. Frank Beddor, what is your favorite dinosaur?
Well, for sure a T-Rex. There's just no question. For sure. And
all right.
I think I think it would be my sons as well. So
it's a safe option. It's a good choice.
Phrase. Or Barney,
Or Barney.
I know he's Barney the dinosaur, but does that really count?
I think so. I think so.
We have a very large Facebook group that follows, and so I put a question in there the other day. I asked this question of our group: what was your favorite dinosaur? Do you know how many people included a picture, a meme, a GIF of Barney as their favorite dinosaur?
Everybody.
I lost count. Yeah, but there was a lot of people that were like, and people were like, no, I'm not joking. And there was the picture of Barney.
Well, I just fall into the middle with the pack. Sometimes that's a great place to live.
I'm over in Triceratops corner all by myself, so
Right.
One
myself, and I.
ankylosaurus, please.
There you go. Very
All
good.
right. Well, Frank, thank you so much for being on the show today. Where can our listeners go and find more about you and about your work?
Well, if you go to frankbeddor.com, it has all of my work, and you can find my podcast, All Things Alice, wherever you listen to podcasts. And certainly you can find it on frankbeddor.com. So I hope that some of your listeners that are interested in Alice and talking about creativity and the power of imagination will come over and check it out.
I know I'm definitely gonna go check it out because just this conversation with you, I already got it pulled up on Spotify. So once we're done here, I'm gonna start listening to episode 1.
Okay, well, the episode with Bad Hats, the theater group, is terrific. They're a really creative, articulate group talking about their Alice in Wonderland musical. They composed all the music. They're in Canada, and
Cool.
they perform all of the music while they're acting out the scenes. It's a very lively, enjoyable podcast. So that one's fresh. I think it went up on Wednesday.
Mhm.
So check it out.
All right, cool.
Well, thank you. We'll make sure to put those in our show description and in the show notes, so our listeners can find everything about you.
Great. Well, thank you guys. It was a real pleasure, and it's fun talking about pop culture. You have a great podcast, and
Oh, thank you. All right, guys. We also want to remind you that subscribing is the single most important thing that you can do to ensure that we get more amazing guests like Frank Beddor here today to have these great conversations. And this was fantastic. And we're sure that if you go check out the links that are down in our show notes down below, that not only can you find more great information about Frank, his books, and everything else that he's working on, also his podcast as well, but also check out our Patreon, because there will be portions of this conversation that you did not hear on our YouTube channel or on your favorite audio podcast destination. Those are Patreon only moments, and those are our bonus clips, our behind the scenes type of fun. And there are 5 levels of Patreon that you could subscribe to, from $1 to $40 each, with their own little extra bonus perks and fun for you to have. So you're going to want to check that out for sure. But if for whatever reason you are not happy with the content of our show today, please feel free to lodge a complaint with the head of our complaint department. And that, of course, is Warren from There's Something About Mary. Now, Warren doesn't really care how many copies of the complaint you send in. He's not really going to look at them. And really, he doesn't even care about the complaints. If you really want to get us in trouble with Warren, tell him we have his baseball, or trick us into touching his headphones. Either way, we're screwed. Now, the real trick is you have to touch his headphones first to get his attention. And if he hasn't beat you into a pulp, well, then you know what we're in for. And so far, only Ted and Mary seem to have possessed that superpower. Not even Brett Favre, the Brett Favre, the one and only Brett Favre, can do that trick anymore. So choose carefully and just keep putting up with our shtick, or try to go for his headphones. Because if you do, it's a bold move. All right, guys, that's going to conclude us for the FSF PopCast. And thank you to Frank Beddor. Goodbye.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Copyright 2023 FSF PopCast.
Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF PopCast. The views expressed by the guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpopcast.com. Original music by Jordan Michaels.